You're listening to Rise Up, stories of recovery, resilience, and renewal with Matthew Taub.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Taub. You are listening to Rise Up, stories of recovery, resilience, and renewal. My guest today is an amazing guest. I've spent the longest time talking to her just a few minutes ago for way too long as we were getting ready to record. My guest today is Kathryn Gordon. Kathryn, we're going to get you right into the thick of it right now. Introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, and we're going to get right into your story, especially based on what we just talked about earlier. Your podcast with Kathryn For Real, which we'll talk about again at the end. You just did a podcast about why you quit drinking, which is really why I wanted to reach out to you for this episode. So introduce yourself and we'll start from there.
Oh, thank you for having me, Matt. I am first and foremost a mother and a wife of my husband's John Gordon. I'm now a speaker and an author. My husband and I wrote a book together called Relationship Grit. It's a best-selling book. Yeah. And I am in the process of writing 2 more books right now, one on sex and intimacy, and the other one having to do with overcoming, which is one of the reasons Matt had me on today. He heard my story on my podcast. I'm also a podcaster called Why I Quit Drinking. And in the podcast, I just share on the surface level, really my history of drug and alcohol abuse and where it led me ultimately. And, you know, I think my biggest reason for doing that interview and that podcast is to let people know that it really doesn't matter what your past looked like. It doesn't matter even who you acted like in the past. Your past doesn't define you. Doesn't matter where you came from. Doesn't matter what neighborhood you grew up in. I grew up in a really rough neighborhood. You can create your life today. And I'm an example of that, even so much so that as I married my husband. And by the time I married my husband, and you hear that in the podcast, I'd cleaned up my life and changed my life. But for John and I, we were both really movers and shakers in Atlanta when I met John, and started to find ourselves. My husband had started, he was 24, started a nonprofit organization called the Phoenix Organization that raised money for children's charities. He opened a bar, got some of his friends together and opened up a bar. So he'd had a bar. So he was doing a lot of stuff. And then I, in my own right, was doing a lot of fundraising. I was also big in the fashion community. So I had a lot going on. And I started to find early on with us that it was a matter of whose event is more important. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to fall into that cycle, really, or that kind of behavior with him. And I was also an actress at the time. And so I realized, and I wasn't like a famous actress, right? So it was one of those things. Was I going to make the decision to pack up my life and move to LA and really go for it? Or did I want to be with this guy? And the truth was, I loved acting, but I probably wasn't good enough or had the drive, enough drive to really get out there and hustle it in LA. And so we kind of had a meeting of the minds, and I realized for me, and when I say this, please know, I don't recommend everybody do this. It's very, very conditional to what your relationship is, but I knew that I had to get behind my husband. And so I decided he wasn't even my husband at the time. So let me just say that I had to get behind my boyfriend. But for me, it was a good decision. And as we got married, I became his support. And so my point with all this is I raised my children. I definitely helped on the side. We had opened a franchise called Moe's Southwest Grill. I was doing a lot of the bookkeeping and all of that. When he started speaking, I was booking him. So I was always kind of working at home. But it wasn't until my kids were off to college that I decided to do what I call my second act, which is what I'm doing now. And so it's the whole point with no matter what, nothing defines you. I mean, just a couple years ago, my life looked totally different. So
Right.
yeah, that's what I
So
want.
that
Go
I
ahead.
love it. That and we go through chapters. We've heard we have chapters in our lives. There's all these different chapters we have, and the stories that we've been through, and you know who we are, who you were at 24, who I was at 24, is not the person I am today. Far
Mm-mm.
from it. I remember years ago, my wife, we were at a wedding, and they had a wedding, I think a bar mitzvah actually, and they had a breakdance contest, and just for fun, somebody decided to just throw me in the center
Oh my
of
gosh.
this circle of people dancing for this breakdance contest. When I was done and won the breakdance contest, my wife looked at me. She said, "I had no idea that you knew how to do that."
I love
And,
it.
and a friend of hers said, like a month later, she's like, "How do you handle do you not get bored with Matt? You've been married long enough. Do you not get bored?" She said, "I just learned he was a breakdancer. I seriously have no idea. There's a new person I'm meeting every couple of years. So no, I won't get bored at all." And that's also part of, the stories that we have been through and like our journeys, and they're great chapters and learning experiences. So, we talk about you grew up in a rough neighborhood and you're far from that now, right? Like so much has happened, in your podcast, go back to, why you quit drinking, as just that was moments, you started drinking and experimenting with drugs at a younger age,
Mm-hmm.
which I'll be honest, most people, when that story started and I heard that, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to go off the cliff really soon. Right. And which I love, which it doesn't. Like you don't give all the stories. There's a lot of small little cliffs, I'm sure, that you're able to get out of because you kind of, allude to that. But all those stories, and, there's so much there that when you got through it and decide to make a change, right? And if you want to hear, we'll talk a bit about it, Kathryn. But if you want to hear more about this, definitely listen to Kathryn's podcast, Kathryn for Real, about why she quit drinking. But there's that period where you went to rehab.
Mm-hmm.
So you can talk a bit about that part, of your life there, and then rehab, and then from there, because a lot more happened from rehab. And it's funny, when I listen to your podcast, when you tell it, I had to go back a couple times and try and figure out an age timeline.
Oh, I should have. Yeah. It's
Only
always
because
one of those things. Once I record, I'm like, I should have said this and I should have explained that.
Oh, it was great though, because it makes you kind of think like all this happened. It's like, so I graduated college. I'm like, okay, wait a second. So much happened in that period of time. It seemed like it was much long. So it was a long time because it started early, but it was compacted earlier. So let's go there, because again, it's like 19 different volumes of books.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
well, if you want to go back to that, I mean, I had literally, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this. So yes, started smoking pot, first joint at 12, full-fledged, doing bong hits every day at 13 at the bus stop. Then, 15, I ended up smoking some pot that had PCP in it, and I totally flipped out.
Yeah.
And made a deal with God that I wasn't going to do it anymore. And I didn't. I did have flashbacks for several years from that, which was really freaky. But no sooner did I quit smoking pot that I discovered cocaine and loved it. And of course, being young and doing the kind of things I was doing, I was bikini modeling, all that, it was free flowing. I mean, just, everybody was offering it. And it was the 80s, like I say.
80s, yeah, I was going to say it was the 80s.
And so then I ended up meeting this older guy who was who dealt it. I was at his house at a party. We start dating. At home, it was before high school. I was having this surgery. I was 17. I always try to think, was I 16 or 17? I think I was 16 turning, but I must have been 17. But I graduated from high school 17. So I need to go back and so I might've been 16. And I was having this surgery the next day, and I had asked my mom if she could take me to the hospital to do this surgery. And for whatever reason, that night, my dad came in drunk. And by the way, when I talk about my dad, he was the love of my life. And he absolutely adored me and worshiped the ground I walk on. But he was an alcoholic.
Right.
And so he would do things, and the next day he would not remember. And so this particular night he came in and he's like, your mother can't, you started like going off on me about her taking me to the hospital. And I was just really already really afraid. And so he literally tried to strangle me. And I jumped out of the window and went to this guy's house and moved in with him. So I never went back. And at that point, my poor dad, was like, I'm so, why aren't you home? Come home. But he's blackout alcoholic.
Right.
And please come home. No. So I didn't. Now I lived with this guy for several years. And of course, like I said I want to go to college. And he said, you don't need to go to college. Why would you want to do that? That whole thing, which I had somehow, I really believe by the grace of God. It was like God was somehow, steering me in the right direction. Yeah. And so I somehow ended up getting into college. And so then, and that's the part, the middle part that maybe I wasn't clear on, is that I would, like he and I would get into these horrible fights. He was very physically violent when that would happen. So he would beat the crap out of me. And then I would go back to live at my parents' house. So it was like a back and forth after that. But literally when I graduated, by the time I graduated from college, I had a job lined up selling communication systems in Nashville, and I graduated from college. And it was like a week and a half, 2 weeks later, I moved and I never went back.
That's awesome.
But as the saying goes, no matter where you go,
there you are.
There you are.
Yeah. I love that. I must have paused that again and I listened to that. I'm like, I love that line. Yeah. And I've heard it so many times. I haven't heard it in a long time. And I heard that on the weekend. I'm like, oh my God, that's the best. Yeah. It really is the best line.
So anyway, you want me to keep going?
Yeah. So, well, you're, wherever you are, you go there, you are. So
I found all the same things, right?
Right.
And then I found some new things. I found ecstasy. And so it was there in Nashville working at Cable and Wireless Communications that I went into my boss and said, I have a problem and I need help. And as I said in my podcast, I call my dad and I'm like, Dad. And by then he had gotten sober, by the way. And so I called my dad and I said, Dad, I have a problem and I need help. But, you never really want to think your child. So right. Like, no, you're fine. And again, I wasn't exhibiting the same kind of things that you think of somebody who had hit rock bottom, like him. He had gotten drunk and drinking, driving, all of that. And he still didn't hit rock bottom. He was a naval aviator. So, that was but that was humiliating for him because he was always this man in charge.
Right.
And, he was in jail. He said it was like, so anyway, but I did end up going to rehab. And here's the weird thing. So I went to this place called the Care Unit of Jacksonville Beach, and it was in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. Do you know I now live in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida with my family?
That's amazing.
Isn't that wild? And I've tried to find the place. It obviously doesn't exist, but from my geography, I think it was actually near the hospital here. That but I thought, okay, what's the likelihood that I would have, it's just weird.
We get pushed certain ways. I'm convinced I'm convinced everything happens for a reason.
Yep.
And we're steered in a way to make sure that we have to remember, we have to move forward, and we were always it's there, but not in the forefront. It's just kind of in the rearview mirror if you want to see it.
Yeah.
So you did rehab. So make it really simple. How long did it stick for? Because it doesn't always stick for everybody.
Right. No. So maybe a year. Okay. I moved down to Atlanta. I was, kind of like I told you, or in the podcast, I should say, I told you. But I was dating like a couple professional wrestlers and then one of them lived down in Atlanta. And so I kind of went down. I was driving down to Atlanta because it's a lot of fun in Atlanta during that time. And so I would drive down on the weekends just to go do things. And I thought, you know what? I'm moving. So literally packed my stuff up, went down to Atlanta and found a place to live. And I started, instead of picking up a sales job right away, which is what I was really good at, it was easiest for me to just get a waitressing job or a bartending job, because that's what I did through college, right? And so I ended up working at this place, but it wasn't long, right, until I ended up just having a drink, and it starts like that. So did that. And, but then ended up meeting this guy that had a lot of money and a lot of drugs and a lot of other stuff. And so, kind of went on that path with him and then hit rock bottom and then decided that I was going to change my life. And that was when I did, for a very long time, stayed, clean and sober. And then it wasn't until I, was married and had children and now living down in Florida that the thought came into my mind again. And it was totally different, right? Because I'm like, well, it's not like I ever do drugs or anything, which I never ever have done again.
And you weren't really a drinker either, if I remember, you mentioned like
really. Yeah. The drugs definitely took precedent, but you know what? Let's just call it what it is. Like it, you medicate. So it wasn't my drug of choice, but I like to check out. I like to escape.
Yeah, so, you numb it out. See, that's whether it's food. People do with Amazon shopping now. Whatever it is to make you feel better and zoom out. And
I can do it with food too. I can, I've done sugar bombs, like tons of sugar, and so I've experienced all that. I mean, when I was in high school, I had bulimia. I don't even want to say I had bulimia. I attempted to have bulimia.
Right.
I'll tell you what happened. Just kind of go back. I started eating like all these boxes of Girl Scout cookies, and I was drinking Ipecac syrup. Do you know what that is?
Oh my God. Yes.
And one time, I'd done it like twice, and this third time, I went to Red Lobster. I don't know if you guys have Red Lobster in Canada. You might. I ate all this food, get home, I eat all these boxes of cookies, and I think easy because I'm going to do this Ipecac syrup. It wouldn't work. And I'm laying there sick to my stomach. I mean, seriously. And I'm like, God, if you could just let me take care of this, I'll never do this again. And I never did. And so then I wasn't bulimic anymore. Like, boom. Right. So I'm sure I wouldn't be the classic diagnosis of that. But, I say my attempt at being bulimic, trying to eat whatever I want and numb out and then not have the consequences. That's, the explanation. But anyway, so I came down here to Florida and, different lifestyle, lots of beach clubs. And I'm looking around and all these women are walking around in their bikinis with their cocktails. And honestly, it looked really sophisticated.
Yeah.
It looked really enticing. It looked really cool. And I'm like, well, shoot, it's not like I'm going to do any, and so that's kind of how I started drinking again.
Right. Yeah. And you were married now.
Married. And, that's the other thing too, is like I would get together and we'd have like bunco groups and book clubs, ladies, we called them booze clubs.
Right.
But, we would get together. It was really all about drinking. Yeah. And I would be like, I can't go home too wasted. I would like always tell my friends and they'd be like, girl, that's who he married. And I'm like, no, actually,
right, exactly. Yes.
It's not. He did not marry this. So, he was always, and I'm grateful for that, by the way. That was one thing I never gave him a hard time for. I did have a best friend whose husband, when she tried to quit with me when I was quitting, really gave her a hard time, called her boring, like really made her feel really bad about not drinking. And I'm grateful. I was very careful not to give John a hard time or not to cut him down, because somewhere along the line, intuitively, I knew that was really good for me.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I want to talk about, because it wasn't, that was your past. We know where we got there. This all happened. But the bigger part, and I think a lot of people who listen to my podcast, they're married or their relationships. And that's a big part, because I know for my wife and I, for Felicia and I, it was hard. Like I when I went into rehab, she looked at me and said, we got to remember the background of all that was I was an addict. I lied. There was a lot of anger behind it, what she had to sit through and deal with because I was a blackout, but I was an everyday blackout. So mine was much more intense. And, my rock bottom didn't include DUIs. I almost feel at times when I talk to people on the podcast where I'll say, I feel like I've either missed out or I had imposter syndrome for a while, because I didn't have major, there was no jail, there was no DUI, but
doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. And it's all the same at the end of the day.
You know what? Did you feel the shame?
Right. Yeah.
Did you have the guilt? You blacked out. You didn't remember. Those are big deals, right?
I had to remind myself of that, saying I drank every day, all day, because I couldn't handle not. Mm-hmm. And I blacked out almost pretty much, I think, every night for a couple of years.
Wow.
That's a big deal. So with Felicia was, she said to me the day before I went into rehab, she said, I don't know if I'll be here when you get out.
That's hard.
And I looked at her, I said, well, I understand that. I said, I don't know. I said, you need to know, I'm not doing this for you though. So whatever happens at the end of this 3-week stint, I'm coming out the other end of it.
Yep. Here
or not. Granted, selfishly, it was a live-in program. I got permission to live out because I still had my gym. I still trained people in the morning at 4:00 in the morning, went through till 8, went to rehab for the day, and then went back to work to train people, and then went home.
Wow.
Selfishly, to almost make sure that she was there and my son was there. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I had other things to do. And I think you and I are very similar in this. If we're going to do something, it's got to be big, and you got to go hard at it. Just give it everything you got. So it's go big or go home, which is what I ended up doing. And then when I did come out, so she was there to support it. I remember, we would go, she came to my first AA meeting with me, which didn't work, but she was there. She was always supportive, always there.
AA meeting and it didn't work. Tell me about that.
So AA for me, there are different programs that work for different people. And AA for me, and AA is an amazing program. 12 steps are amazing. I just didn't find the right one that suited me with the right people. I think part of the culture that we grew up in, right? My favorite TV show growing up was Cheers, right? When you think about it in hindsight, it was a show about alcoholics.
Good point.
Right.
So I'm glad you're saying that, and not glad. Let me say it like this, because I'm with you, and that I always say, let me tell you something. AA for me in my early 20s, I was in a really good group of people, and it saved me. Right. Those people became my family. Since then, and as an adult, I have not found that same. I ended up, finding this spiritual group of women that became, my family and my connection that helped me. And so, I think that's the unfortunate thing about AA is that they have this it's our way or no way.
Yeah.
And I think that can set people up to think, okay, well, then if this way is not working, I'm not going to stay sober. But there are other ways.
There are many other ways.
Yeah. And so I agree with you there. And I'm really careful about the way I say that, because I would never want to dissuade somebody from doing it. Like I said, it absolutely helped me. I was very, very lucky to be in an area of Atlanta that had, but here, I actually went to a meeting here way back when this started happening. Because I was like, oh, I don't know. And it was I was there with all these 7-year-old people. It just wasn't a connection, right? So you have to kind of find what works for you.
It is. It's finding what works. And when you're younger, it might work better. And where I was, I laugh at the very first one I ever went to. My wife came with me, and she had our son in the Bjorn thing. We're standing there, and I'm looking around. It was story after, and it was packed. It was huge. It was story after story. This man would go up and tell a story. Another man would go up and tell a story, and another man would go up and tell a story. And they were awful, like heartbreaking stories. And I looked around the room because I'm noticing it was another man after another man after another man. I'm looking around, and I looked at Felicia, and I said, I think we're at the gay AA meeting.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
It was just one of, and it was, right? And I know there are men's rooms and there are women's rooms, but this was actually just a gay men's meeting. I'm like, oh my goodness, it was just definitely not the room for me that I would relate to anybody.
So you weren't able to relate to their stories, right? And that's my point. Is like that, you have to feel like you're home.
Right. And I tried different ones and it worked. Like it never meshed for me, but I found what did work, in a 21-day program that was more about, hey, let's figure out why. Let's figure out what the trauma was. And, if we know your why, you'll know why you won't drink again.
Right.
The spiritual aspect, also amazing. Like it depends where we are in our life at the same time. Like right now, I would probably do better if I needed it in a spiritual room because that's where I am now. Right. It all depends on what she needs. So you did that. I love the fact that, you mentioned in your podcast that John doesn't drink. Your daughter doesn't drink. I don't know if your son does, but
my son does.
Okay, well,
he's got that Irish Carol gene like his mom. Yeah.
I got 3 teen boys. One's in university. From what I found out, he's a lightweight, which is great. But having, like I said, Felicia being supportive of me, John supportive of you, but you did talk about one thing that I wanted to touch on. When you didn't drink, you didn't get drunk all the time. So it wasn't like I was a blackout almost every day. Hit it well. I was functioning, but you had moments, right? Like months at a time, or like months in between, or a year in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what was hard for John because he couldn't really intervene because 9 times out of 10, when I was with him, I wasn't drinking, or if we were out to dinner with friends, I would have a glass or 2 of wine.
Right.
Every once in a while, like I said, I'd get a little, too buzzed, but like nothing extreme. But it was like once every 6 months or 8 months, all of a sudden, like it was right before Christmas, my girlfriends, we all decided to get together to do like a Christmas thing. And so everybody brought champagne, and I love champagne. I drink it, and I'm a guzzler, by the way. Like,
right. Well, that's what I'm saying. We go big or go home.
I'm just a guzzler. I'm a guzzler. Like,
I drank almost all of this in one go.
There you go. And I seriously, if I'm out, I do this with food. I do it with, like, I'll look and go, you're not going to finish that? Like, you can't waste that.
So we could never go to dinner together. My wife will get mad because everything, she's like, it's not even like at the table and the food's gone.
Yeah. So, and let me tell you, that was the other thing, like from a weight standpoint, is once I start drinking, even if I wasn't getting wasted, like, I'm still eating more. I'm eating a lot more. And so, but anyway, right before Christmas, got together with some girlfriends. We were doing lunch. It was 11:30. Everybody was getting together. Matt, I got home at 11 o'clock that night. We drank champagne all day and all night.
Wow.
Now, when I
remember those days.
When I got home, my husband looked at me and he goes, did you know that you were going to drink all day? I'm like, no. And I was almost like almost on the other side of the drinking, right? Like I was drunk, but it was like just this all, and you think about that. Well, that's not normal. Like if you really think, like you think about it, like, wow. So I was kind of like thinking about, it's like I was in a different place in my, let's just call it alcoholism, whatever you want to call it. Right. Yeah. And so, but again, it was nothing. There was nothing, I didn't get a DUI. I didn't like
Right.
sleep around. I didn't like, there's nothing that he could say, like, okay, this is a deal breaker. Like you
Right.
left the house on that. He couldn't. And so he was really in a quandary. But the truth was, kind of like you said to your wife, it could never, I would tell him all the time, it can never be about you. I do
Yeah.
not ask me to quit for you because I do not want to sneak my drinking.
And that's
So that was always a thing. Like I
right.
just was like, I'm not going to hide it. You can give me, I'm not going to hide it. So
And
that was kind of our thing.
and so when you talk, I love what you talked about where, the next day you wake up and so do you remember conversations? And the best visual you gave was like that kung fu, like that chopping, because that is exactly, you're on the defensive. First of all, if you black out drunk, I don't know a single person who actually wants to have the conversation of, do you know what you did? No, I don't. I don't know, and I sure as hell, clearly there's a reason why I don't know. I don't want to be reminded of it because that guilt and that shame is so much worse than anything I could have done.
That's right.
And that's what I think. I know it comes from a good intention. It really does, from a good intention. And so when you said that, like, that's hard for people to understand that I don't want to talk about it. I really just want to forget about it. But at the same time, I find that when it's thrown at you like that, you kind of have to confront it a bit.
Then I just wouldn't, and it got to the point, like he would embellish a little bit. Like my friends would be like, it really wasn't that bad, or, and so for him, he wanted to make it sound really, really, and not to say that sometimes it wasn't bad. I don't mean that because, I'm sure sometimes it was, but I'm saying like it got to the point where I really didn't always believe, to the nth degree of what he was saying. So it's kind of like, yeah. So I just would tune it out. And so it was just always like, I can't do this for you. I can't do this for you. I can't do this for you. It's about me. It's about me,
Right.
And then till that one day, like I say, I like literally open my eyes. I'm looking around with one eye. Where am I? And then starting to go through, how did I get home? What did I do? And then my damage control. What was I going to say to John when he starts coming at me? And that had always been the thing. So yeah, I do find it interesting how when I went out there and I was ready.
Yeah,
you're all set. With my karate chops, he didn't do that. And I'll tell you, it was like all of a sudden this big mirror just came and looked right at me. And I was like, wow, I don't want to do this anymore. It was a God thing for sure.
100%.
Yep. And since then, Matt, I don't know what it is, but I'm grateful to God. That urge has left me. It has left me. And I say that, that may not be the case for some people. And so I don't want to say that it has to be that way. Sometimes you are going to struggle. Sometimes there's going to be, and I'm sure there's probably a time coming up where it's going to hit me. So, don't wait for that time for that to be right. You might have that, but man, the gifts on the other side of that, the clarity, the mental clarity, like I have all these speaking engagements lined up. I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that if I was still, I really think it was starting to affect my memory, for sure.
For sure it was. For sure it was.
Even though I wasn't drinking all the time, I think just the combination of, So I feel like a veil has lifted.
100%. And like you said, John gave you grace, right? Like he's like, I think you need grace now. And that's a big one. And that it's that reveal. It's like, I'm looking at myself in the mirror. That's all I can do now. Because he's not throwing stuff at you. It's like, I'm just here for you. Are you okay? And then it's like, shit.
Yep.
Now, now my defenses are down.
Yeah.
And now you're like, it's as much as you feel this, it's like, I know that exact feeling. It's like, almost like that deflated moment of like,
Yeah.
okay, I get to
Yeah,
relax. But
I was so geared up for the fight. Like all of a
right.
sudden it was just like, oh, it's about me.
Yeah. And that it came back. It's so,
I
I
don't have
love
anyone to
that.
fight with. Wow. Maybe this isn't so cool. You know, maybe this is not a good idea. It really made me look at myself. Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've been accomplished like this whole time. It's not like you were like, drinking every day. Like you've been accomplished. You've done things this
No,
entire
I wrote a
time.
best-selling book with my husband.
Right.
I had started my podcast. But it was affecting my goal, like just my, honestly, like I said, I really feel like it was mentally affecting my memory and my stamina. I was definitely achy. You get inflamed. Like just
You
think about
do.
it really from a health standpoint, right? Like your
It
body
changes
does
you.
get inflamed. Yeah.
It
So,
changes. So
yeah,
you've gone through all that. So I believe it's been about 50 odd days.
it's January 1, which it's so
Awesome.
funny. I feel like God knows me. I'm like kind of OCD like that.
Right.
Like it's great. Like some like even if I would think about it, I go, well, I could never mess that up at this point. I mean,
Right.
January 1, right?
It's
Not that I have,
not
but
like
you know
it's
what
the
I mean? Like,
13th. It's the first.
it could, if it was the 22nd or I don't know, like
Right.
January 1, here we go.
Clean slate started off. So January 1.
Listen, I say that with utmost respect and honoring, you know what I mean? Like I don't take it
absolutely.
for granted for 1 second. Yeah.
And we're not taking away from it whatever everybody else is going through, and everyone's story is their own, and where they sit with it. It's like you said, you don't have the urge, and I find that not having the urge, will it come back one day? Maybe a moment here or there,
Right.
but I don't have that urge. That urge is gone, right? Like it's not there. Do I have the urge to eat licorice more than I used to? 100%. Yes, I do.
I know. There's a whole study on that by Levels. Levels is it's a blood sugar. I'm actually wearing a CGM right now because it monitors your blood sugar.
Right.
And there's a whole thing that goes along with alcohol and sugar 100%.
100%. Yeah. So when I got sober, the day after my wife had me fast on the floor, 4 days later, we are in Jamaica.
Wow.
Yeah. Talk about like intense. Like that happened. I'm the last person she ever wants to see again right now. We're on vacation together. And a friend of mine said, who's a recovery specialist, said, go with lots of candy. Like he's going to have full on feed his sugar craving as much as you can.
Yeah. Because it's also hits those dopamine receptors.
Right.
It does. So
for fun, if you really want to change it, we started doing cold plunges a month and a half ago.
I've been doing them in the shower. I haven't been, I want to get a cold plunge, but we're going to redo my house. We're tearing it down. I'm thinking, do I want to, but I'm thinking about
That's a whole other world for that. So what's next? So we've got all this, you have all these things coming up.
Yeah.
And again, you've had the best-selling book. You've got your podcast. There's not like you haven't been doing things, but now that this has come up, you've got everything coming up. What's next for Kathryn?
Yeah. So, as I was telling you at the beginning of the podcast, I'm writing a book on sex and intimacy. It's a good book. Okay. It's not, there's nothing raunchy about it. It's not
right.
positions or anything. It's really about the connection between.
It's not a picture book.
Yeah. And then, since kind of giving my story and telling it to some people, after I started to write it down, I've had several people say like, you need to write a book about this. So I'm in the process of just started writing that book as well. And I think that'll be a talk that I give, probably
awesome.
one of my talks that I give around the country.
And you got speaking engagements coming out, right? So you've got those.
And so that was another part of that is, I kept getting like this nudge from God, like, you got to get out and speak. You got to get out and speak. And I wasn't doing it. And I really think I was doing it because I was really comfortable kind of, doing what I want and drink, like running around and flying all over the place. And so, and I had fear. There's a whole other thing there. Even though I was an actor and modeled and been in front of the camera, I had some fear. And so I didn't want to do it. And so it was the wildest thing when I decided, like literally I'm praying and I'm like, fine, I'll do it. I get up to go grab my phone. I have a speaking request. So it was definitely, that's a God thing too. So clearly God, one of what I speak on is my book, Relationship Grit,
Right.
mostly. And that is to let couples know that my book, by the way, is not a book about like, oh, look, our relationship's so great.
No, it's not.
No, here, read it. My book is about, we went through hell and we came back. And if we can, you can too. And here's how.
Right. So I will say that both Felicia and I, we did read it together.
Yeah.
Not like, we didn't read it out loud, but we read it at the same time. And we would talk about it. So it is, again, like you said, it's not that it's the perfect, it's not, oh, look at us, we did everything right. And it's, picket fence. And this is, it's, I used to, when we first got married and started having our own issues, I would always say to people, we spent all this time prepping for our wedding, and it's going to be huge. It's amazing. And, kids from a young age fantasize what their wedding day will be like. And nobody talks about, even the fairy tales, and they lived happily ever after. Right. We all plan that first day. Nobody plans the second day.
Right.
There's nothing that comes after the wedding.
I know.
And
that's exactly right. Yeah.
There's a whole we picture, and that's part of it. We picture, especially with media and what we've been told. Like, I'll be honest with you, like, this. It's not easy. And you do need grit to get through it. I have a friend of mine who, when he got divorced, looked at me and he had to move in with his family, his parents. And he said, I'm listening to my parents talking to one another. And I'm telling you, if I said a fifth of what my dad said to my mom just now, my wife would have thrown me out ages ago.
Right.
He goes, how come they...
What it is, so many times, I mean, like, I certainly didn't, I didn't have role models to have what a healthy relationship was, at all. And, I think that's what happens is you get two people with baggage coming into a relationship. If you don't have any kind of guidelines, then, you're kind of, let's say, almost like you have blinders on and trying to figure it out. So that was the hope for me in writing this book, is that, no matter where you are in your relationship, by the way, this is the coolest thing. I got an email from this woman. I got on the phone. I actually talked to her. She said, Kathryn, little Jewish woman, Sherry Chait. Kathryn, I want you to know I read your book and I went to go talk really mean to Jerry. And I ended up thinking of your book. It was the cutest thing, right?
That's awesome.
I said, Sherry, how old are you? She goes, I'm 82. Jerry's 86. We've been married 65 years. So I start saying, we say your prayer now every night before bed. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I want to get her on my podcast. I said, Sherry, you got to come on. She got sick. But is that the cutest thing
awesome.
ever?
I love it.
But
it is.
What it told me, and which was my goal and John's goal, you can improve your marriage no matter where you are in it.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't matter. So that was like, that testimonial tops all testimonials.
100%. Well, it's also, if you look at all these articles now, it's like top 10 things to know if your relationship can be saved. There are issues. There's many things that can come into a relationship, alcohol being one of them. But all this stuff is great. So I'm looking forward to hearing all the speaking you're doing and your next 2 books. I mean, if they're half as good as Relationship Grit, honestly.
Thank you. That's my goal.
It's
let's see. I'm not writing it with John. The benefit of writing a book with John Gordon is he is truly the most organized person I've ever met. And he also has a real vision for where things go. These I'm writing on my own. It might be a little bit harder to pull it together. Well, but Matthew, this has been so fun.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it. I want to honor your time that you gave me today. Thank you so much for doing this. It was such a pleasure. And I hope one day down the road we can do it again when your next books come out. And I just thank you so much, Kathryn. I'll speak to you soon. Stick around for 1 second. I'm going to log off here. Everybody, thank you so much. It's been Kathryn Gordon. I'm going to put everything you need to know about Kathryn in the notes here so you can find her podcast, find the books, and everything else she's doing. And again, thanks, Kathryn.
Thanks, Matthew.
You're listening to Rise Up, Stories of Recovery, Resilience, and Renewal with Matthew Taub.